Hi, this is Colin from the Endurance Collective, and I'm here today to talk about the difference between measured power and ZPower, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the difference between different types of trainers you might use. So this is my current trainer setup. This is a Saris Hammer H3 direct drive smart trainer, and it has a few different ways of broadcasting. It can broadcast in Bluetooth and also ANT+. You'll notice I have an ANT+ dongle there, although I do run this primarily in Bluetooth, and there's a little light sensor here that will show in blue if it's connected with a Bluetooth connection, which it is right now, to my laptop over here that I have Zwift running off of. Now, one of the things about this trainer is it actually has a backup power meter in it, so it's got dual recording for verification. Now, I also have what you could call triple verification because I'm using these Stages dual-sided cranks, although when I run Zwift, I run it as a controllable trainer via Bluetooth and then use the backup power meter in here, but then I will look down because I have the Stages signal going to my cycling computer, and obviously I'll notice if the power seems way off or something. So here is the second screen that comes up when you start Zwift. This is the connection screen. You can see I've got everything all connected here. Everything that you see here right now is connected via Bluetooth. This is the trainer, the controllable trainer, and you'll see when I click on this, I can connect via the ANT+ or the Bluetooth connection. Zwift does recommend, if you're able to connect on Bluetooth with a modern protocol, it's a stronger signal. It'll have a slightly more realistic feel. You can experiment with both and see if you notice any difference or dropouts using one or the other. But all other things being equal, we'll probably start with the Bluetooth. The power source, this is what I talked about earlier as a separate power meter in the trainer that I have this hooked up to. But I could also hook this signal up to my Stages cranks here. So I could, you see lots of different options here, and it's a little bit confusing. The first one is the ANT+ for the connection for the trainer. The second is for the like I said, there's two power meters really in the trainer, so I can connect it either one of those, the FEC or the power. Then there is the Stages cranks on ANT+, and then you see here with Bluetooth, it shows me two different connections for the Stages. That's because one is for the left side, one is for the right side power meter, and then one is the Bluetooth connection for the trainer, that's what I'm going to use because that is going to be the strongest signal for me. Same thing with my heart rate monitor. I have a Wahoo ticker. Okay, there's nothing Bluetooth, but there should be a Bluetooth, there it is, signal coming out there for my heart rate monitor. I'm going to use cadence sensor. I'm going to use the one from the, you can run this, although it's not an actual cadence sensor, from the trainer, or I could run it from the cranks. I found it's a little bit more accurate to run from the cranks here, and I could do it off of either this one or this one. I'm going to just do it off of this one, and then I'm pretty much ready to go. There's a calibration button here, which is this wrench. I don't want to do that, if possible, until I've warmed up the trainer a little bit. It's not as big of a deal as with, older wheel-on trainers, and it's very, very important to ride at least 10 minutes before you calibrate. So I could calibrate this cold, but if I've got the time, I'm going to warm up for 10 minutes. So now here I am in Zwift, and it's pretty simple, but I've got a power meter. I'm just riding along. I just chose the world kind of at random here, riding along, and my speed is going to be determined by, of course, my power output, which is going to be determined by how fast I'm pedaling, what gear I have it in, but also the signal, the resistance coming into the trainer, which is a signal coming from Zwift. If I start going uphill, the resistance is going to go up. If I go downhill, the resistance goes down. If I draft, the resistance goes down. Blah, blah, blah. It has all these calculations. Your weight and height that you programmed in come into play. Lots of things, but I'd say it's pretty accurate in general in terms of the speed that you would see here versus in the real world. Maybe it's a little bit on the high side, higher in Zwift than in the real world, but all in all, a pretty realistic feel. Excuse me. So now it's been about 10 minutes of riding, and I'm going to calibrate things. I'm going to go back into the menu screen. It's pair. You just hit that little wrench next to the power source. This is for the power meter in the trainer. And I'm going to spin it up to 23 miles per hour. And stop. And just coast. This is called a spin down. It will take, it'll tell the trainer, tell the software how long it's taking to spin down from 23 to 0. Basically, make sure that it's getting an accurate reading. I am also, while I'm doing this, I'm going to go into my stages. And for this, to calibrate, I have to unclip and have my right pedal down at the 6 o'clock position. So to calibrate, I can do that right from my cycling computer here. And it's going to give me a calibration for both of those. All right, so now I've calibrated my cranks and the trainer, and we go. Now I would say here that what I'm looking at on the computer is not always going to be exactly what I'll see on the screen, but if I look at the intervals or the averages, last couple of times I've looked at it in detail, it's come out to within 3 watts difference. So very, very close between the stages, cranks, and the Hammer H3 trainer. If I bring up my power a little bit, bring it up. Right now I'm seeing 240, 250, 230, 250. Yeah, so I have both of these set on an instantaneous read. So of course it's bouncing around a bit. So we'll come out pretty close. To do a little jump here, going up here into the 600s, 400, you start coasting, and 0, pretty much down 0. So some moment-to-moment fluctuations, but all in all, pretty close, pretty realistic feel.
So here what I did is I unplugged the Hammer trainer, just moved it back a little bit. These are pretty heavy, so they're not exactly portable. And I brought in my rollers. Now I'm gonna ride with the rollers here. Even if you have a smart trainer, as I've talked about before, still lots of good reasons you might want to occasionally ride the rollers. And one thing I will point out here is that I have a speed sensor on my back wheel here. This is a Garmin speed sensor, and I will just make a quick note that this reads in ANT+ only. It does not have a Bluetooth signal, which is why I need this this ANT+ dongle going to the computer. Right now, all of the devices that use indoors here. My heart rate monitor, the smart trainer, the power meter on the bike, all can broadcast in Bluetooth except for this speed sensor.
So I've got a couple of ways I can ride on Zwift even without the smart trainer, using the rollers or any other kind of dumb trainer, so to speak. The best and most accurate one would be using the, at least in terms of speed, would be connecting with the stage's cranks. So it doesn't really matter what kind of trainer or rollers or whatever it is that you're riding on. If you have the power coming from the cranks, I can just click on here and hopefully we'll pick that up here. I will spin these, search for that. Okay, so it's showing that. That's the Bluetooth signal from the cranks, and you can see I've got one from the right, one from the left, and I can do the ANT plus as well. I'm going to choose this one, and I'm pretty much good to go. You know, different trainers have different power curves, characteristics there, but the only thing that's really going to matter in Zwift is your power and what the terrain is where you're riding. You can go right back here and just hop on my rollers. Now, unfortunately here, it's only showing me about half of my power. That's because I connected to the right side power meter. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to try the ANT plus. It should show both of these. There we go. Let's see. Let's see what they say here. Yeah, you can see how one of these only has half. And then the ANT plus, the Bluetooth are about the same. The top and bottom one. So I'm going to choose this one. I'm going to go back. Yeah, that looks better. And I'm getting the same reading, on the exact same reading on Zwift as on my bike computer. Of course, because they're coming from the same place. So this is not a smart trainer. It's not controllable in the way that the other trainer is, but it does have some benefits. Problem you're going to run into with a lot of rollers is just that you run out of resistance. I'll show you what I mean. Because so I'm in my 5211 now. I'm going to bring it up. Even at about 110 RPM, I'm just over 300 watts. That's only going to get me so far if I'm doing a race or a competitive group ride. I'm just riding along in endurance, can probably get by. But I'm not going to win any sprints if I'm maxed out just over 300. Now I have one other option here, and this is called ZPower. if you are new to Zwift, maybe you've heard this term floating around, probably because a lot of people complain about other users in group rides using ZPower. So I'll show you what that is. I'm going to disconnect there from my stages, and I'm going to go here, and this is my speed sensor, unlisted rollers. That's what I have. And they're connected. Now, the reason this exists is so people without a smart trainer and without a power meter can still ride Zwift. The Zwift people want as many people on their platform as possible, and it's a way to do it without having to invest in a really expensive power meter or trainer. All you need is a speed sensor. Problem is, it's not exactly super accurate, and it does max out. For me, right around 400 watts. So I'll show you how that looks. Get on here. Now, what I've found is that lower intensities, it's fairly close, if not a little low even. Like, I'm at about 200 watts right now. Maybe it's hard to lock it in there. And I can see on Zwift, it's about the same. If I go, let's go down a little bit. All right, and slow it down. I'm at about 150 coming off the stages. You can see it's about 135, 140 on Zwift using ZPower. The trouble is, coming off the speed sensor, on the rollers, I can hit some very high speeds without a lot of power. That's one of the nice things about rollers. It's why you use them to do some of that speed work. But the ZPower is going to go much higher than my actual power. So I'll pop it back into the 5211. Just bring it up. You can see it does not go any higher than 400. Just hit a ceiling there. Right now, my actual power is about 250, 260 maybe. Bring that down. So on one hand, your max, you hit a ceiling there. Can't go over 400. Again, you're not going to win any sprints at 400 watts. But if my actual power is 250, 260, I can ride at 250 or 260 pretty much all day. And if ZPower is telling me I'm at 400, I can change things. So you can see why a lot of people complain about it. In a lot of the races, you're not allowed to use ZPower. You certainly won't be counted in the final results. But if you can still ride something in a race, you can be a factor in that race, even if you're not counted in the final results. So personally, I think using Zwift power in a race or even a group ride is kind of altering the dynamics. It's kind of like jumping into a race in real life with an e-bike. Even if you're not counted in the final results, it can certainly influence how things are playing out. But if you don't have a power meter, you don't have a smart trainer, and you want to use Zwift, and that gets you on there, and that helps your enjoyment a little bit more. It makes it a little bit easier to ride indoors and do your training. Great. The more people on bikes, riding bikes more, and training, the better, in my book. Just understand that it's not going to be super accurate because it's not measuring your actual power. It's an estimate of power, and even a broken clock is right twice a day. So in some places it's going to look kind of close. In other places it's going to be really far off. So you might want to use it in some cases. I used to use it on these rollers because my previous power meter, I used to use an older Pioneer crank, and it only, it did not broadcast to Zwift reliably. So I kind of had to ride the ZPower when I was riding the rollers. Now with these stages, I can ride it that way. That's going to be a more accurate way. So that's what I use when I'm on the rollers, and then I use the dual connections on the hammer when I'm using that. Hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know if you have any questions.